Dear students, I welcome you to another session of my course, Development of Social Thought and Classical Theory. Today I will talk about Georg Wilhelm Hegel. Hegel was a French philosopher. Hegel was a German philosopher who has written extensively in the field of philosophy. He has contributed his work in epistemology, metaphysics, history, aesthetics and ethics. I will just focus on two of his important works and their main ideas. His first and a very famous work is The Science of Logic. In this book, he presented the idea of dialectics. Dialectics, the literal meaning of dialectics is the art of argument. It means that how do you argue, how do you formulate your arguments. Now, and it started with the Greek philosopher. It is attributed to Socrates that Socrates was the inventor of this method. And what he used to do was that he would ask his students to ask him questions, and through those questions and by answering those questions, he will demonstrate to them, he will show to them the inadequacies and the deficiencies and the contradictions and the confusions in their thinking. Socrates believed that some of our questions are the product of our wrong assumptions, are illusions and delusions which we carry about the reality. So, he developed this method of asking questions, which is commonly known as the Socratic method. What is different in Hegel is that he further extrapolated the concept of dialectics and he applied it to the development and growth and evolution of human ideas. He said that human ideas are the product and the growth of the strife between opposites. That, for example, we come to recognize light. How do we recognize light? What is light? So, it is through its opposite that we come to know light, and that is darkness. When I refer to you that there is darkness, automatically your brain, your mind responds that there is light or there must be light. So, it is the continuous struggle or strife or continuous, you can say, a battle between the opposites which lead to the growth of human ideas. So, he applied the concept of dialectic not simply to the logical formulations and to the exposition of the inadequacies of human thought by exploring the limits of questions. Rather, he applied it to understand the growth of ideas. If there is one idea, if there is light, there must be darkness. If there is day, there must be night. If there is water, there must be dryness also around. So, it is through the continuous struggle of opposites that we come to understand the nature and the structure of reality. Now, this concept of opposites or contradictions can be applied to history, it can be applied to the cultural sciences, it can be applied to the social sciences, and it can also be applied to the natural sciences. It has vast applications. Now, our area is because social sciences, we are dealing with the sociology. So, we will just try, and history, and we will try to focus it on these two areas. So, according to Hegel, all ideas are rooted in contradictions and in opposites. That is his general proposition. Now, when we apply this notion on history, we find that human societies in the beginning they were simple. Human organization, human social organization, human culture and civilizations, they were simple. People used to live in caves, people would live in small tribes and bands, hunting gathering bands, and then gradually, the complex ways of living and growing developed. For example, human beings, they develop horticulture, then it was further developed through pastoral societies, through nomadic societies, where human beings were keeping a lot of animals and doing animal husbandry. Then they moved on to establish agriculture, horticulture and then agriculture. So, we find that every lower idea give rise to another higher idea, historically and socially. There were simple societies, then there were agricultural societies, primitive, from primitive to the agricultural, horticultural, agricultural, and from agricultural to industrial, and from industrial to post-industrial and post-modern society. This is because human beings are continuously trying to discover new means of controlling and new means of manipulating the environment. You see, if you look at human growth and if you look at human development, you will find that it is through the interaction and it is through the control and management of the natural environment that human societies have become more and more complex. You see, when human beings were living in primitive conditions, they were fighting with simple tools. They had simple tools, knives or bows and knives, they were trying to, and gradually as the language developed, as the means of communication developed, as the mean of social organizations became more complex and developed, the human technologies, they also became complex and developed, and man's control and man's interaction with the environment became manifold and complex. You see, now this growth, Hegel, the interesting point in dialectical process is that every growth, every development brings in its fold its own negation, its own subversion, its own opposite. For example, the growth of capitalism, if we look at the 18th century, in which the capitalism became the dominant economic philosophy in Western Europe, in North America and in the rest of the world, which is also known as the liberal economics, or nowadays it is known as neoliberal economics. So, during the rise of the capitalism, we also find that on the one hand we find the growth and expansion in factory civilization, new technologies, new inventions, new innovations were being undertaken. At the same time, when we see the rise of bourgeois class, the rise of the capitalist class, we were also observing the rise of working class, the proletariat, the laborer. So, the rise of capitalism in its fold carried the seed of socialism or communism. Now, the capitalist society, as you know, is a class society. It is a status oriented and class society. It is a society which is based on social and economic inequalities. The more there will be social inequalities, the more there will be economic inequalities, the more there will be growth of capital. Because capital always is controlled by few and it stays within the hands of few, because they know how to manipulate the labor and how to manipulate the energy of those who are at the lower rung of the capitalist society or who are without capital. So capitalism in its own growth, the capitalist society in its own growth, carries the germs of its antithesis. If capitalism is the thesis, if this idea is the thesis, its antithesis is socialism. And the synthesis, new synthesis in socialism, what you try to do, that instead of individual ownership, instead of private ownership, you try to establish the state ownership or the social ownership or the social control of the means of production. And gradually, as Marx has shown in his analysis, that once the societies have moved from the individual ownership, private ownership to the collective and social ownership of the means of production, it ultimately rises to the next level of social organization, which is more higher and which is more humanistic, and that is the communist mode of production, in which all means of ownership and all means of private property are abolished, and the capital sort of becomes a voluntary product, and the means of production are then shared equally by everyone. Society becomes more egalitarian. It becomes more, this is what Marx at least derived from his understanding of the Hegel. But the issue is much more complicated. It is actually we can take it to the mental level, to the cognitive level. Actually, it is the human cognition, it is the human brain which is the ultimate source of production of all new innovation and invention. If you look at, if we try to apply the Hegelian idea of dialectics in our times, so you can see that it is the human brain which is the ultimate repository of all ideas, and new ideas are created by the human brain by working on the environment. And the most powerful manifestation in our times is the continuous technological innovation. It is through continuous production and growth of new technologies that the human beings are creating new ideas, are creating new possibilities, are presenting new ways of doing the old things. No, there was a time when it would take months and months to go from one part of the earth to another part of the earth. Now you can simultaneously communicate across thousands of miles thanks to technology. You can deliver things overnight to hundreds and thousands of miles thanks to technology. Now, how this technology is developed? It is the product of human brain. And how human brain develops new technologies? When new environmental challenges are confronted, are posited to the human brain then works on it. A contradiction is presented from the environment, a challenge is presented from the environment to the human brain, and human brain then acts on it and creates a new antithesis, and from there a new synthesis, a new level of innovation, a new level of invention. Look at the coronavirus pandemic, which became a global pandemic. For the last 2-3 years it has become, but people have developed and devised new ways of doing work, work from home and work from a distance, and which is now known as work 2020 in the management literature. So everybody has adapted to the new challenge posed by the environment, and technology has helped, has enabled the human societies to respond to this challenge. So it is a continuous process of opposites, it is a continuous struggle between the contradictory forces, contradictory social forces, contradictory historical forces that are at strife and at struggle. And sometimes the forces which are at strife and are at contradiction and struggle with each other, even they don't know that they are at struggle with each other. If you go into the political arena or into the economic arena, people don't know who is controlling their destinies, who are controlling their lives. Now, for that you have to go into the dynamics of power. If you want to understand the political sociology of the society, you have to understand its power dynamics. Who holds the power? Who controls the power? Which class controls the power? And which class is powerless? So, there is always a struggle. There is always a strife between the powerless and the powerful. They are struggling, they are striving, you see. So, Hegelian dialectical method can be applied to diverse areas, to economics, to culture, to politics, to society, and even to literature, even in art, the literature 100 years before, from now on, of the past, was entirely different from the literature which is being produced today. Now, in real time, people are producing literature, are writing on the internet, on the social media. Everybody has become a creator. And say 50 years or 100 years back, it was a skill, special skill. And the writers were the specialized people. They thought, no, everybody has become a writer, thanks to technology, thanks to innovation. And you never know where this innovation, where this ingenuity and creativity of human brain will take you. Sky is the limit. Already through the creative power of human brain, the Americans and the Chinese, they have sent their probes and rovers on the Mars. Perseverance and Zhurong, from the Chinese, they are on the Martian, lands, and they are exploring it. Similarly, the NASA has sent James Webb telescope to explore the deeper space, and it's a very complex, telescope, very powerful, many times powerful than the Hubble telescope, and it is exploring the far deeper reaches of the space, which we could have never imagined. I mean, in real time it is observing the black holes, in real time it is observing the firing and merging of the galaxies and the birth of new galaxies. Similarly, a time you will see will come, if the human species on earth, it remains intact and it survives, that people will be traveling with much more faster speeds. We have already crossed the sound barrier. You never know, one day we might touch the barrier we might cross the barrier of light, speed of light. We might develop technologies and innovative methods of traveling with the speed of light. And imagine, once you are able to travel with the speed of light, what kind of things you can achieve and do. And this can be done through science, through technology, through systematic study of nature, through systematic study of society and culture and other artistic activities. So, dialectical process is evident, it is visible in every phase of life. The second important concept of Hegel is the concept of spirit. Spirit, you can roughly translate it into consciousness. Spirit is not in the sense of soul. He is not using the word in the sense of soul. He is using it in the sense of consciousness, awareness. So, he says that if we look at history, so we find that different ages have its own spirit, which he calls as the spirit of age, Zeitgeist. He terms it as Zeitgeist, the spirit of age. Every age has its own spirit, unique consciousness, which is unique to it. And when the new age comes, it brings in its fold its own consciousness, which is different from the previous age. And this is how, step by step, block by block, the human consciousness advances and develops. The way human beings lived, say for example 1,000 years ago was entirely different. 5,000 years ago was entirely different, and the way they are living today. The kind of comforts, the kind of facilities, the kind of accesses, the kind of freedoms, we are enjoying today they were stories. They were just, imaginations for the past generation. The improvements in the health, the improvements in lifespan, the improvements in the social standards, the improvements in quality of life, the improvements in the creation of wealth, improvements in the infrastructural capacities of the human societies have increased exponentially over the last 100 and 200 years. And this is because of the consciousness of the age. We were living in an age which is, you can comfortably call the technological age, the techno age. Similarly, the consciousness is reflected in the mastery and the competence in technology. You will see that every society is embedded and every society is grounded in a high technological accesses. And through these high technological accesses, they can, communicate, they can exchange ideas, they can do trade, they can do business, and they can travel and meet each other. You see, while 200 years ago, people used to travel on, horses, and they had slow means of communication and transportation. They would communicate either through letters, they would travel on sea, through ships, or on foot mostly. So the communication was slow, the exchanges were slow, the understanding was slow. But that age has its own consciousness. 18th century or the 17th century, it had its own consciousness. Where it is the age in which, human beings, realize the power of their reason. That is why it is called the age of reason. The spirit of reason, the spirit of human intellect was unleashed in the 18th century. And then it, led to far-reaching revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and then the Chinese Revolution. They were all the product. Changes in South Asia, changes in Far East, they were all the product of that past, age. But having said that, you should keep in mind, as Hegel says, that every age is known by its own unique attributes and characteristics. Today, you will hardly find societies who are not democratic. Throughout the world, you will find democratic societies, democratic consciousness, personal freedoms, liberties, access to information, access to technology. This is the spirit of our times and our age. It was unthinkable 200 years ago that people will enjoy personal freedoms, because 200 years, 300 years ago, there used to be rule of one family, royal family. There used to be rule of one, autocrat. Now there are very few autocrats in the world, few hardly. In the Middle East, you will find, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, you find the hereditary rulers. But in most of the world, you find the democratic rulers, the parliamentary forms of government, the congresses, you see, where people, choose and elect their representative, and through those representatives, their governments are formed, and then they make decisions and run their societies, you see. So this spirit, this consciousness, Hegel says it has three forms in which this spirit or this consciousness is expressed. The first is the absolute spirit, and that is manifested in the religion and the higher poetry and the higher literature. The human consciousness, which is expressed in religion, in ethics, in literature, in higher poetry, is the repository of absolute spirit, the absolute consciousness, every society. Then the subjective spirit, that is the consciousness of an individual. Subjective spirit is the consciousness of an individual. It is the personal consciousness. It is the consciousness of one's own mind, one's own existence and one's own being. How one come to exist and how one comes to realize his relationship with the external reality. That is the subjective spirit. And then comes the objective spirit. Objective spirit is reflected, objective consciousness is reflected in law, it is reflected in morality, it is reflected in institutions, social, political and economic institutions. Through these institutions, then the subjective consciousness, it achieves its perfection. If there are no objective spirit, if there is no objective consciousness, subjective consciousness will become ineffective. It will become useless. So, in order to be productive, creative and innovative, subjective consciousness or subjective spirit needs the objective consciousness or the objective spirit. It needs a society, it needs a culture, it needs law, it needs morality, which means that human behavior and the human societies are regulated through law, through economic and political and legal and ethical institutions. And without these legal, political, economic and ethical institutions and frameworks, it is not possible for an individual to live a reasonable life, to live a satisfactory life, and to achieve and create and produce and innovate. Individual creativity, the flowering and the growth of human brain and its ability to create new solutions for the old problems can only become possible when the individual consciousness merges into the objective consciousness. Subjective consciousness, when it meets the objective consciousness, when the individual meets the history, when the individual meets its culture, when the individual meets its law, then a new age, a new spirit of age is created. A new absolute spirit is created, a new consciousness. So, on these three levels, the absolute, the subjective and the objective, the consciousness is continuously moving, and through the interaction and exchanges between these three levels of consciousness, all new historical, cultural, technological, environmental innovations and creativities and productivities are done by the human beings. So, that is all for today. Thank you very much.